Okay, have I tried eating something hot, masturbating, and taking a nap? I could use a nap right now. Although you know what, that probably is it. I didn't get enough sleep last night, but whatever. So Charles Sanders Peirce by Robert Burch in the SCP. Let's do it. Screw it. And thank you for the bit cynismitic. Alright, so we will definitely do section 10 if we here's a question. Okay, here's what we got for you guys. Half Arabs and Arabs are Semites. That's fair, but like I just think it's funny that that's what it did to your name. But yeah, so there's a biography, the difficulty of access to Peirce's writings, deduction, induction, abduction, pragmatism, pragmaticism, and the scientific method, anti-determinism, Tychism, and evolutionism, cynicism, the continuum, infinitesimals, probability, verisimilitude, plausibility. Like, if you guys have any like preferences to all these things, let me know. Like, basically this is one of those, like, you put like a number in chat if you are interested in one of these sections to make sure I get to it, because Semiotics wants mind and semiotic, which is fine, but play something ominous and dark. I mean, I'll just put the volume down a little, sorry. I mean, this stuff is dark, but I'll put the, yeah, I'm sorry if the volume was too loud on that. This music is going to be threatening in tone. Like, the whole thing is actually kind of dark. It's just, it's a big playlist, so not all the songs are going to be as dark. I mean, listen to this one. Oh, Valpo. Charles Sanders Peirce has gotten very, profile has gone way up. So this is good and dark, Semiotics. Oh yeah, he's the founder of American pragmatism, or pragmatism, really. Okay, so we'll definitely do the biography. We'll get to section 10, and y'all can give me there's so many Peirce and Peirce. I get confused. Yeah, Peirce. This is Charles Sanders Peirce, the American pragmatism founder. All right, so let's get into it then. Here we go. Charles Sanders Peirce, 1839 to 1914, was the founder of American pragmatism. After about 1905, called by Peirce pragmaticism in order to differentiate his views from those of William James, John Dewey, and others, which were being labeled pragmatism. A theorist of logic, language, communication, and the general theory of signs, which was often called by Peirce semiotic. An extraordinarily prolific logician, mathematician in general, and a developer of an evolutionary psychophysically monistic metaphysical system. Practicing geodesy and chemistry in order to earn a living, he nevertheless considered scientific philosophy, and especially logic, to be his true calling, his real vocation. In the course of his polymathic researches, he wrote voluminously on an exceedingly wide range of topics, ranging from mathematics, mathematical logic, physics, geodesy, spectroscopy, and astronomy on the one hand, and that of mathematics and physical sciences, to psychology, anthropology, history, and economics on the other, that of the humanities and the social sciences. Okay, so the brief biography, which you can see is not actually entirely brief. It's a little longer than some of their other biographies in the SCP. Charles Sanders Peirce was born on September 10, 1839 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and died April 19, 1914 in Milford, Pennsylvania. His writings extend from about 1857 until near his death, a period of approximately 57 years. He published works run to about 12,000 printed pages, and his known unpublished manuscripts run to about 80,000 handwritten pages. The topics on which he wrote have an immense range, from mathematics and the physical sciences at one extreme to economics, psychology, and other social sciences at the other extreme. Peirce's father, Benjamin Peirce, was a professor of mathematics at Harvard University and was one of the founders of, and for a while director of, the U.S. Coasting Geodetic Survey, as well as one of the founders of the Smithsonian Institution. The Department of Mathematics at Harvard was essentially built by Benjamin. From his father, Charles Sanders Peirce received most of the substance of his early education, as well as a good deal of intellectual encouragement and stimulation. Benjamin's didactic technique mostly took the form of setting interesting problems for his son and checking Charles's solution to them. In this challenging instructional atmosphere, Charles acquired his lifelong habit of thinking through philosophical and scientific problems entirely on his own. To this habit, perhaps, is to be attributed to Charles Peirce's considerable originality. Peirce graduated from Harvard in 1859 and received the Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry in 1863, graduating summa cum laude. Except for his remarkable marks in chemistry, Peirce was a poor student, typically at the bottom third of his class. Obviously, the standard curriculum bored him, so that he mostly avoided doing seriously its required work. For 32 years, from 1859 until the last day of 1891, he was employed by the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, mainly surveying and carrying out geodetic investigations. Some of this work Peirce undertook simply to finance his diurnal existence and that of his first wife, Melusina Zena Fay, while he devoted the main force of his thinking to abstract logic. Nevertheless, the geodetic task involved making careful measurements of the intensity of the Earth's gravitational field by means of using swinging pendulums. The pendulums that Peirce used were often of his own design. For over 30 years then, Peirce was involved in practical and theoretical problems associated with making very accurate scientific measurements. This practical involvement in physical science was crucial in his ultimately coming to reject scientific determinism, as we shall see. Yeah, see, the thing about Peirce, I'm sure they're going to mention this, is that he was poor. He was really poor. He was basically just scraping by. He never had a whole lot of money to his name, and, it was a pain in the butt for him to do what he was doing, and it was just, not good. And so, but, he was doing interesting scientific stuff. So, okay. From 1879 to 1884, Peirce maintained a second job teaching logic in the Department of Mathematics at Johns Hopkins University. During the period, the Department of Mathematics was headed by the famous mathematician J.J. Sylvester, whom Peirce had met earlier through his father Benjamin. This teaching period also was characterized by Peirce's having several students who made names for themselves in their own right. Among these were Oscar Howard Mitchell, Alan Marquand, Benjamin Ives Gilman, Joseph Jastrow, Fabian Franklin, Christine Ladd, later after having married Fabian Franklin, Christine Ladd Franklin, Thorstein Veblen, and John Dewey. Brief commentary will be offered at the end of this essay on three of these figures: John Dewey, Oscar Howard Mitchell, and Christine Ladd. It is sometimes said that William James was also one of the Peirce's students, but this claim is erroneous. It conflates the fact that James, being an old and close friend of Peirce, as well as being a fellow member with Peirce in the so-called Metaphysical Club in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was with the non-fact of James being a student of Peirce's at Johns Hopkins, along with John Dewey and others. Yeah, they were buddies, at least for a while, I think. Peirce's teaching job at Johns Hopkins was suddenly terminated for reasons that are apparently connected with the fact that Peirce's second wife, Juliette Anne Froissy, also known as Julie Anne Portelet, was a Romani, moreover a Roma with whom Peirce had more or less openly cohabited before marriage and before his divorce from his first wife, Zena. In fact, Peirce obtained his divorce from Zena only 2 days before marrying Juliette. The Johns Hopkins position was Peirce's only academic employment, and after losing it, Peirce worked thereafter only for the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, and constructing entries for the Century Dictionary, and writing book reviews for The Nation. The government employment came to an end the last day of 1891, ultimately because of funding objections to pure research, and perhaps also to Peirce's extravagant spending and to his procrastination in finishing his required reports that were generated in an ever-practical-minded Congress. Wow, they don't fund academics. Shocking. Thereafter, Peirce often lived on the edge of penury, eking out a living doing intellectual odd jobs such as translating or writing occasional pieces and carrying out consulting work mainly in chemical engineering and analysis. For the remainder of his life, except for money inherited from his mother and aunt, Peirce was often in dire financial straits. Sometimes he managed to survive only because of the overt or covert charity of relatives or friends, for example, that of his own friend William James. In his youth, Peirce was amazingly precocious, and he began to study logic seriously at an extraordinarily early age. According to noted Peirce scholar Max Fish in his introduction to Volume 1 of the Writings of Charles Sanders Peirce, a chronological edition, page 18, Peirce's introduction, in the introduction, Womoko. Hi, I'm Womoko from Wam. I was expecting some sweeping stream. Oh, sorry. Sometimes I do some sweeping, but not right now. I also read random philosophy stuff and attempt to explain. But yeah, we're gonna have a tournament soon on Minesweep Pro. Karaga's hosting, so you can like shout out Karaga. Oh, I misspelled Karaga. Not Courage. Hey, look at that. That's somebody else. Okay, yeah. Yeah, there we go. So, yeah, so that'll be coming up, and I'm going to have some more Minesweep Pro content soon, but not yet. But yeah, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. And you can hang out here and just listen to me read stuff and ask questions if you want. We're talking about... No, go right ahead. Interrupt away. The topic is going to be Charles Sanders Peirce, who is one of the greats of American philosophy. So if you want to learn about American pragmatism, this is probably the best place on the internet at the moment. But yeah, so we're just going through some back history because one of the other people here asked to get some background, because Peirce is becoming more and more prominent. People are realizing that Peirce has things to say, and basically he was neglected till I think the 1950s when people started to really pick up. I don't remember when exactly people started to realize that like his stuff was really good, but yeah. Okay, but yeah, feel free to interrupt. Go right ahead. It's cool. Yeah, so page 18 of the introduction. And first immersion of the study of logic came in 1851, within a week or two of his turning 12 years of age. Remembering the occasion in 1910, in his note on the doctrine of chances in Collected Papers of Peirce, Volume 2, Section 408, hereinafter called Collected Papers, CP 2.408, Peirce himself remembered the crucial event as having occurred in 1852 when he was 13 years old. Regardless of his exact age, at the time of the event, Charles encountered and then, over a period of almost a few days, studied and absorbed a standard textbook of the time of logic by Bishop Richard Whately. Having become fascinated by logic, he began, this is too small for everybody. Let's see, can we, oh my god, it doesn't zoom. This doesn't zoom. Yeah, oh well, what are you gonna do? This is weird. This should zoom. You wanna know why? It crashed. That's weird. Alright, so let's reset that. I was like, why is this not working? This is amazing. There we go. Yeah, I'm gonna try and look it up. I'm trying to figure out. Well, I don't know if I have a reader view in this. It might be useful if I get a reader view. I don't know if there is one in this, but I can just make it much bigger. There we go. Yeah, the sidebar goes away. Nerdy Swag says, how does this work? I'm taking philosophy next semester. What's the answer to the questions? The answer to the questions in philosophy is always more questions. I mean, people like to think there's answers, but usually there's just more fun problems. The answers to the questions are you have now better problems to work on. And then sometimes you get really good problems and people run off and make whole like one day we figured out enough about mind and people ran off and made psychology because they realized you could study that like a science. So that's how it works. Philosophy basically is people get better and better asking questions, and you get better and better problems until people realize, oh, we can do a whole thing with this. And then people go run off and do stuff with it. As far as my stream goes, you can ask whatever you want. I'm just I go over stuff. I read random things and we discuss it. I criticize it, we talk about it, whatever. It's cool. Oh great, you're the annoying 7-year-old. The funny part about that is they say they like that in philosophy. The people who say that are liars. No one likes the annoying 7-year-old. That's why they're annoying. But if you have questions, feel free to ask. But I will tell you when I think something's stupid. But yeah, go right ahead and ask. The one thing I do appreciate is that people say there are no stupid questions. That's not true. There are stupid questions. The problem is you won't know what they are. So you might have to ask anyway. So yeah, feel free to ask. I'll tell you if it's being dumb, but I'm usually not mean about it. It's sorry, that's just wrong. But other than that, yeah, if you're taking philosophy next semester, that should be a good time. if you don't mind me asking, what are you taking? Like, are you taking like intro to something, or are you just taking like great books or one of these survey courses, which are fine? Oh, okay. If you know, then you're just doing it for fun. Well, then you can go be a troll. That's cool. Yeah, Philosophy 100. Okay. Yeah, good times. You'll probably read some great works, they're great because they're called the great works because they're usually pretty good. Yeah. So yeah, feel free to ask questions. We're just going over one of not a contemporary, but a very modern person. Like this is someone that currently is still sort of in vogue, and he died in the last century. But so that's all. Okay, so let me know if you have questions about stuff. I will try to answer it. Okay. Having become fascinated by logic, he began to think of all issues as a problem of logic. During his freshman year at college, Harvard, in 1855, when he was 16, he and a friend began private study of philosophy in general, starting with Schiller's Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man and continuing with Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Schiller's distinction among the three basic human drives of German words I can't do, Peirce never forgot or renounced, and it became the basis for Peirce's distinction between the man of practical affairs, the man of scientific activity, and the man of aesthetic practice. By Kant, Peirce was initially more or less repelled. After 3 years of intense study of Kant, Peirce concluded that Kant's system was vitiated by what he calls puerile logic, and at about the age of 19, he formed the fixed intention of devoting his life to the study of and research in logic. It was to earn a living and as a research logician, and Peirce described himself at the time of his graduation from Harvard in 1859, just short of his 20th birthday, as wondering what I would do in life. Within 2 years, however, he had more or less resolved his problem. During those 2 years, he had worked as an aide on the Coast Survey in Maine and Louisiana, and had returned to Cambridge and studied natural history and natural philosophy at Harvard. He said of himself that in 1861, he no longer wondered what I would do in life, but defined my object. It is evident that his adoption of the profession of chemistry and his practice of geodesy allowed Charles both to support himself and before long also his first wife Zena, and to continue to engage in researches on logic. From the early 1860s until his death in 1914, his output in logic was voluminous and varied. One of his logical systems became the basis for Ernst Schrödinger's great 3-volume treatise on logic, the something on Ernst Schröder, not Schrödinger. Peirce then had an early and deep disagreement with Kant's position about logic, and he never altered his view that Kant's view of logic was superficial. He, that is Kant, never touches this last doctrine, that is logic, without betraying marks of hasty, superficial study. Even worse, Peirce held, was the logic of Hegel. Kant's fault is 100-fold more true of Hegel's logic. That work cannot justly be regarded as anything more than a sketch. And just so anyone here doesn't know, the last paper I read, 2 papers ago, but it was last Philosophy Roulette from a few days ago, you can look it up in the VODs, was this really crazy paper about Hegel and how Hegel was talking what Hegel's concept of natural science was actually, which people don't touch with the 10-foot pole for very good reason, but we just read about Hegel last Philosophy Roulette, and it was Hegel in the end always turns out to be not as crazy as he's made out to be, but also requires a huge amount of slogging through muck to get there. Okay. Nevertheless, Peirce continued to respect and read the first critique throughout his life. For a fuller discussion of Peirce's own views about how his work related to that of Kant, Hegel, and Schelling, see the supplementary document. Peirce's relationship. Okay, you see, this is what I mean. Peirce goes, this whole thing is going on for a while. So you've got a whole, second paper on the relationship between Peirce and German idealism. Okay, so now, here's what we got next. That took, a few minutes, but wasn't terrible. So we can go on to the difficulty of access to Peirce's writings, deduction, induction, abduction. Should I skip right over to Mind and Semiotic? Let me know. Let's see. I'll just keep going to section 2 from now on. But everyone, like I said, give me some votes in chat if you have a preference, and let me know if you have areas that you want me to hit, because this just keeps going. So. Okay, difficulty of access to Peirce's writings. Peirce's extensive publications are scattered among various publication media and have been difficult to collect. Shortly after his death in 1914, his widow Juliet sold his unpublished manuscripts to the Department of Philosophy at Harvard University. Initially, they were under the care of Josiah Royce, but after Royce's death in 1916, okay, so that's just 2 years later, and especially after the end of the First World War, which was 3 years after that, the papers were poorly cared for. Many of them were misplaced, lost, given away, scrambled, and the like. Caroline Eisel, one of several genuine heroes in the great effort to locate and assemble Peirce's writings, discovered a lost trunk full of Peirce's papers and manuscript only in the mid-1950s. The trunk had been secreted, apparently for decades, in an unlit, obscure part of the basement in Harvard's Widner Library. This is what I mean. It took until the 50s before people really understood the scope of what Peirce had done, and like they understood what he did, because like this is one of these weird things in philosophy, and this happens in other places too. Like Newton's writings were like this. They had trunks of Newton's writings that they didn't actually open up in Cambridge. They just kept it in a corner. So like this happens, and it still happens nowadays. I think you don't realize how much stuff is like in paper somewhere, and even if it's especially like there's gonna be a hard drive somewhere and it's just gonna be lost, and like there'll be like manuscripts on a hard drive or like a USB stick. It's like, how would anyone know? But anyway, in the 1930s, volumes of the collected papers of Charles Sanders Peirce began to appear, with Charles Horn, Paul Weiss, and Arthur Burch as their editors. For almost 3 decades, these volumes and various collections of entries culled from them were the only generally available source of Peirce's thoughts. Unfortunately, many of the collected entries in the collected papers are not integral pieces of Peirce's own design, but rather stretches of writing that were cobbled together by the editors at their own discretion. Some might also say whim, from different Peircean sources. Often a single entry will consist of patches of writing from very different periods of Peirce's intellectual life, and these patches might even be in tension or outright contradiction with each other. Such entries in the collected papers make very difficult reading if one tries to regard them as consistent, sustained passages of argument. They also tend to give the reader a false picture of Peirce as an unsystematic, desultory, and unable to complete a train of thought. In general, even though Peirce is often obscure and even at his best is seldom easy to read, the collected papers make Peirce's thinking look much more obscure than it really is. The only sensible and intelligent way to publish the works of someone like Peirce, who wrote voluminously and over such a long period of time, 57 years, is to arrange the publications chronologically and to employ extremely careful editing. In such a fashion, the entire set of Peircean works can be presented as Peirce conceived them and in their natural temporal setting and order. Finally, beginning in 1976, with the organizational conception of Max H. Fish and the help of Edward Moore, the Peirce Edition Project, PEP, was created at the Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, UIPY. Then, under the PEP in the 1980s, there began to appear a meticulously edited chronological edition of carefully selected works of Peirce. This is the Writings of Charles Sanders Peirce, a chronological edition, edited by the Peirce Edition Project of the Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. Although the chronological edition has been fettered from time to time by lack of proper funding, the chronological edition has succeeded in covering extremely well in its first 7 published volumes the major writings from 1857 to 1892. So you can see this. Like, this is like one of these like stupidities of our history. Like, you go watch Lord of the Rings or something, and you see like what the hell is the Ian McKellen. You see like the wizard go to like these libraries and he's like pouring through papers. This is still happening sometimes. Like, we are still doing this at the present time, October 2014. So this is like this is from a decade ago almost. But Volume 7 is still awaiting publication, even though Volume 8, covering 1890 to 1892, has already been published. Volume 7 is to be an edition of Peirce's definitions for the Century Dictionary. It is to be edited by these people in conjunction with the University of Quebec at Montreal, under the supervision of Professor Francois Latraverse. So yeah, it's still like there's these weird things. Like, if you're still looking for certain philosophies, they're buried in university libraries or private collections, and you can't get a hold of them. Like I don't know if I mentioned it somehow earlier. Yeah, Avicenna. If you want to go find Avicenna's work, you will have to go to certain libraries in the Middle East. these libraries are not digitizing Avicenna's work. They like the idea that they have control of this, I think. Someone was saying they were going over there to try to figure stuff out, but you need like special permission to go read the actual works of Avicenna. So it's like, how do you actually go do this? This stuff still happens nowadays, which is, you think like everything's online. It's not true. Like, someone has to go put a lot of effort in to get this stuff going. Okay. The impressive achievement of the PEP is finally making it possible to assess the real Peirce instead of the chopped up and then repasted together picture of Peirce previously available. In particular, the chronological edition has made it possible to see the development of Peirce's thinking from its early stages to its later developments. Questions long vexed in Peirce scholarship are finally beginning to be debated usefully by Peirce scholars, whether there is a genuine systematic unity in Peirce's thought, whether his ideas changed or remained the same over time, in what particulars his thought did change and why, when exactly certain notions were first conceived by Peirce, whether there were definite periods in Peirce's intellectual development, and what exactly Peirce meant by some of his more obscure notions, such as his universal categories, on which see below. Continued funding for the Peirce edition project is obviously a crucial priority on the ongoing effort to bring to public light the thoughts of this extremely important American philosopher. In addition to the chronological edition of the Peirce edition project, other venues for editing and publishing Peirce work are regularly found, and there are several excellent editions of particular lectures, lecture series, chains of correspondence, and the like. Just 4 such editions will be mentioned here. First, there is the edition of Peirce's Cambridge Conference Lectures in 1898, edited by Kenneth Lane Kettner, and with an introduction of the consequences of mathematics by Kenneth Lane Kettner and Hilary Putnam, and comments on the lectures by Hilary Putnam entitled Reasoning and the Logic of Things. Second is there is the edition of Peirce's Harvard Lecture. Alright, you guys can read this list if you're super interested. Okay, I think we're finally going to get into some actual philosophy now. I'm sure you're all super excited. I'm sorry I didn't get the joke earlier about my spooky music. I apologize. Deduction, induction, and abduction. I'm sure everyone wants to know how you abduct people. Prior to 1865, thinkers on logic commonly had divided arguments into 2 subclasses: the class of deductive arguments, also known as necessary inferences, and the class of inductive arguments, also known as probabilistic inferences. About this time, Peirce began to hold that there were two utterly distinct classes of probable inferences, which he referred to as inductive inferences and abductive inferences, which he also called hypotheses and retroductive inferences. Peirce reached this conclusion by entertaining what would happen if one were to interchange propositions in the syllogism AAA1, Barbara, all M's are P's, some S's are M's, therefore all S's are P's. This valid syllogism Peirce accepted as representative of deduction, but he also seemed typically to regard it in connection with a problem of drawing conclusions on the basis of taking samples. For let us regard being an M as being a member of a population. Is abduction TOS? I can tell you, describing abduction in the theoretical sense I don't think is TOS. Like, the theory of abduction, I don't know. We will find out. Yeah, I mean, if you don't know what he means by abduction here, you're going to be sorely disappointed with exactly how boring it actually is. But, yeah. It's not, I like it. It's I wrote a paper in college on Peirce and abduction. Yeah, so this is a deduction. If everything in the class is a P, some of the things, there's some interesting things in the class, and then then they are also P's too. So like a subset, if everything in the class is a P, then a subset of the class is also P. Okay, but he also seemed to typically, everything with a cool name in philosophy always ends up being so boring. It just does. Like philosophical zombies, I hate them for being like one of the most boring topics. I find it to be just terrible. You want to talk about zombies, you think they're fun. Okay. But Peirce also seemed to think typically to regard it in connection with a problem of drawing conclusions on the basis of taking samples. For let us regard being an M as being a member of a population of some sort, say being a ball of the population of balls in some particular urn. So let us regard P as being some property of a member of this population can have, say being red. And finally, let's regard being an S as being a member of a random sample taken from this population. Then our syllogism in Barbara becomes all balls in this urn are red, all balls in this particular random sample are taken from this urn, therefore all balls in this particular random sample are red. Peirce regarded the major premise here as being the rule, the minor premise as being the particular case, and the conclusion as being the result of the argument. The argument is a piece of deduction. In this example, the argument is also an argument from population to random samples that is also a necessary inference. Yeah, so this is interesting. You're moving from a group to a sample, which is not the same thing. Yeah, I was wondering why the author wrote it that way, Valpo. Okay, but now let us see what happens if we form a new argument by interchanging the conclusion, the result, with the major rule, with the major premise, the rule. The resultant argument becomes all S's are P's, the result, all S's are M's, the case, therefore all M's are P's, the rule. This is the invalid syllogism AAA 3. But let us now construe it as pertaining to drawing the conclusion on the basis of taking samples. The argument then becomes, all balls in this particular random sample are red, all balls in this particular random sample are taken from this urn, therefore all balls in this urn are red. What we have here is an argument from sample to population. This sort of argument is what Peirce understood to be the core meaning of induction. That is to say, for Peirce, induction in the most basic sense is argument from random sample to population. It should be clear that inductive inference is not necessary inference. It might well turn out that the claims stated in the premise are true even though the claim made in the conclusion is false. Alright, so this is important. Peirce was looking at deductive logic as the order of premises and conclusions. Once you flip it around, you're talking about structurally different things, but there's still a good thing to do in certain situations. So deduction and induction are in some sense just structurally flipped when you flip the conclusion and the premises depending on the kind of objects you're talking about. So if you're talking about populations, induction and deduction are exactly the same. They're just going different directions. So this is talking about the structure of logic, and we're probably going to get to the semiotics below, where you're talking about signs, things like that, structural analysis on things. Let's now go further and see what happens if, from the deduction AAA1, we form a new argument by interchanging the conclusion, the result, with the minor premise, the case. The resultant argument becomes all M's are P's, that's the rule, all S's are P's, that's the result, therefore all S's are M's, the case. This is the invalid syllogism AAA2, but let us now regard it as pertaining to drawing conclusions on the basis of taking samples. The argument then becomes all balls in this urn are red, all balls in this particular random sample are red, therefore all balls in this particular random sample are taken from this urn. See, that's very different. What we have here is nothing at all like an argument from population to sample or an argument from sample to population. Rather, it is a form of probable argument entirely different from both deduction and induction. It has the air of conjecture or educated guess about it. This new type of argument Peirce calls hypothesis, also retroduction and also abduction. It should be clear that abduction is never necessary inference. There is no need to consider the variant AA1 that is obtained by interchanging the rule and the case in AA1. The resultant argument is of the form AA4, which is exactly the same argument as AA1 with interchanged premises, so it is simply deduction over again. Peirce's thinking about deduction, induction, and abduction can be seen also from examples he gives of arguments that are similar to the syllogisms he discusses, but retain the universal affirmation judgment only for the case, using definite percentages between 0 and 100% for both rule and result. Okay, corresponding to AAA1 deduction, we have the following argument. Some percent of M's are P's, S's are M's, therefore some percent of S's are P's. Construing this argument as we did before, as applying to drawing balls from urns, the argument becomes percent of the balls in this urn are red, all balls in this random sample are taken from this urn, therefore percent of the balls taken in this random sample are red. Peirce still regards this argument as being a deduction, even though it is not, as the argument AA1 is a necessary inference. He calls such an argument a statistical deduction or probabilistic deduction proper. And so you might see nowadays where this is getting such play. If you know anything about epistemology, they're talking about probabilistic knowledge and this sort of thing where you have probabilistic reasoning, where you're going from concepts that are probabilistic and then you're deducing things from it. So this is sort of like very contemporary stuff going on in epistemology. You're talking like percentages of like credences and stuff, and then what do you deduce from that? So, corresponding to AA3 induction, we have the following argument: some percent of S's are P's. That's a result. All S's are M's the case. Therefore, some percent of M's are P's, which is the rule. Construing this argument as applying to drawing balls from urns, the argument becomes: some percent of the balls in this random sample are red. All the balls in this random sample were taken from the urn. Therefore, the percent of balls in this urn are red. Here we still have an argument whose essence is the logical transition from a random sample to the population from which the sample is taken. The inference is made by virtue of what Hans Reichenbach calls the straight rule. The proportion of a trait found in the sample is attributed also to the population. So yeah, again, a very contemporary thing that we do is that you take a sample size and then you extrapolate it out. So this is sort of like, political polling. You take a certain random sampling and then you can say that, well, this is how the population is. Okay, corresponding to AA2 abduction, we have the following argument: percent of M's are P's, that's the rule. Some percent of S's are P's, therefore all S's are M's. Construing this argument as applying to drawing balls from urns, the argument becomes: some percent of the balls in this urn are red, some percent of the balls in this random sample are red, therefore all the balls in this random sample are taken from this urn, because the percentages match up. Again, here we have the character of an educated guess or inference to a plausible explanation. Over many years, Peirce modified his views on these three types of arguments, sometimes changing his views but mostly extending them by expanding his commentary upon the original trichotomy. Occasionally he swerved between one view and another concerning which larger class of arguments a particular instance or subtype of argument belonged to. For example, he seemed to have some hesitation about whether arguments from analogy should be construed as inductions, arguments from a sample of the properties of things to a population of the properties of things, or abductions, conjectures made on the basis of sufficient similarity, which notion might not easily be analyzed in terms of sets of properties. The most important extension Peirce made of his earliest views on what deduction, induction, and abduction involved was to integrate the three argument forms into his view of the systematic procedure for seeking truth that he called the scientific method. As so integrated, deduction, induction, and abduction are not simply argument forms anymore. They are three phases of the methodology of science as Peirce conceived this methodology. In fact, Peirce's most mature philosophy, he virtually, perhaps totally and literally equates the trichotomy with the three phases he discerns in the scientific method. Scientific method begins with abduction or hypothesis. Because of some perhaps surprising or puzzling phenomena, a conjecture or hypothesis is made about what actually is going on. This hypothesis should be such as to explain the surprising phenomenon, such as to render the phenomenon more or less a matter of course if the hypothesis should be true. Scientific method then proceeds to the stage of deduction. By means of necessary inferences, conclusions are drawn from the provisionally adopted hypothesis about the obtaining of phenomena other than the surprising one that originally gave rise to the hypothesis. Conclusions are reached, that is to say, about other phenomena that must obtain if the hypothesis should actually be true. These other phenomena must be experimental tests that can be performed, whose results tell us whether the further phenomena do obtain or do not obtain. Finally, scientific method proceeds to the stage of induction. Experiments are actually carried out in order to test the provisionally adopted hypothesis by ascertaining whether the deduced results do or do not obtain. At this point, scientific method enters one or two of the feedback loops. If the deduced consequences do obtain, then we loop back to the deduction stage, deducing still further consequences for our hypothesis and experimentally test them again. But if the deduced consequences do not obtain, then we loop back to the abduction stage and come up with some new hypothesis that explains both our original surprising phenomena and any new phenomena we have uncovered in the course of testing our first and now failed hypothesis. Then we pass on to the deduction stage as before. The entire procedure of hypothesis testing, and not merely that part of it consists of arguing from sample to population, is called induction in Peirce's later philosophy. Okay, so I mean, I don't know if y'all are paying attention to what's going on here, but basically you start off with like abduction, you make some crazy theory up about the world, then you go deduce results, and then that's how you test them, and then at that point the induction sort of fills in the gaps. This whole thing of like going back and getting something that you have a good theory that you can make deductions from, which is, and then the induction is the process of filling in all the gaps and the things you don't know, so that you have a continuous theory that is about continuity in the world. So, and that's really I think one of the important parts of this is that you have this loop back, and it sort of fills in the gaps in theory and in experiment. Okay. An important part of Peirce's full conception of scientific method is what he called economics, or economy of research. The idea is that because research is difficult, research labor time is valuable and should not be wasted, both in the creation of hypotheses to be tested and in the experiments chosen to test these hypotheses. We should act so as to get the very most cognitive bang for the buck, so to say. The object is to proceed at every stage so as to maximize the reduction and indeterminacy of our beliefs. Peirce had an elaborate mathematical theory of some aspects of the economy of research, and he published several complex papers on this topic. The following section of the present article contains further information on Peirce's notion of the economy of research. Yeah, okay. So we are almost up in an hour now of broadcast time. Well, we're 50 minutes basically. So we're at section 4. Let's see, we've got another 12 sections to go. All right, again, anyone have a quick selection on this? We should probably do pragmatism, because that's what Peirce is, at least the catchphrase Peirce is best known for, but we're also going to get to mind and semiotic, and probably semiotic and logic. So the question is, does anyone want psychophysical monism, probability, verisimilitude, and plausibility, cynicism, the continuum, infinites and infinitesimals like mathematical theory, anti-determinism, Tychism, and evolutionism? So let me know in chat. Where were we? We were on section 4. Pragmatism, pragmaticism, and the scientific method. Probably Peirce's best-known works are the first 2 articles in a series of 6 that originally were collectively entitled Illustrations of the Logic of Science, and published in Popular Science Monthly from November 1877 through August 1878. The first is entitled The Fixation of Belief, and the second is entitled How to Make Our Ideas Clear. In the first of these papers, Peirce defended in a manner consistent with not accepting naive realism the superiority of the scientific method over other methods of overcoming doubt and fixing belief. In the second of these papers, Peirce defended a pragmatic notion of clear concepts. Perhaps the single most important fact to keep in mind in trying to understand Peirce's philosophy concerning clarity and the proper method of fixing belief is that all his life, Peirce was a practicing physical scientist. Already mentioned is the fact that he worked as a physical scientist for 32 years in his job with the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey. As Peirce understood the topics of philosophy and logic were themselves also sciences, although not physical sciences. Moreover, he understood philosophy to be the philosophy of science, as he understood logic to be the logic of science, where the word science has a sense that is best captured by the German word Wissenschaft. Hey, I can say a German word. It is in this light that his specifications of the nature of pragmatism are to be understood. It is also in this light that his later calling of his views pragmaticism, in order to distinguish his own scientific philosophy from other conceptions and theories that were trafficked under the title of pragmatism, is to be understood. When he said that the whole meaning of a clear conception consists in the entire set of its practical consequences, he had in mind a meaningful conception must have some sort of experiential cash value must somehow be capable of being related to some sort of collection of possible empirical observations under specifiable conditions. Peirce insisted that the entire meaning of a meaningful conception consists in the totality of such specifications of possible observations. For example, Peirce tended to spell out the meaning of dispositional properties such as hard or heavy by using the same sort of counterfactual constructions as, say, Carl Hempel would use. Peirce was not a simple operationalist in his philosophy of science, nor was he a simple verificationist in his epistemology. He believed in the reality of abstractions, and in many ways his thinking about universals resembles that of the medieval realists in metaphysics. Nevertheless, despite his metaphysical leanings, Peirce's views bear a strong resemblance to operationalism and verificationism. In regard to physical concepts in particular, his views are quite close to, those of, say, Einstein, who held that the whole meaning of a physical concept is determined by an exact method of measuring it. Yeah, so this is where you get pragmatism. It has to do something. You have to have experiential cash value in all the things. If you can't experience it, it doesn't mean anything. Now, you can still experience abstract relations between things in some sense. You can get the results of them, but it still has to come down to something in experience. And that's like an important thing for pragmatism. Okay. The previous point must be tempered with the fact that Peirce increasingly became a philosopher with a broad and deep sympathies for both transcendental idealism and absolute idealism. His Kantian affinities are similar and easier to understand than his Hegelian leanings. Having rejected a great deal in Kant, Peirce nevertheless shared with Charles Renouvier the view that Kant's quasi-concept of the Ding und sich can play no role whatsoever in philosophy or in science other than the role Kant ultimately assigned to it, specifically the role of a Grenzbegriff, a boundary concept, or perhaps a bit more accurately, a limit concept. Crypto-fascism. Capital-fascism? Where are we getting fascist? I don't know how we fascist on this one for capital-fascism. I guess the cash value concept? Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, cash value. Okay, fair enough. Fascism. A supposed reality is that outside of every logical possibility of empirical or logical interaction with it can play no direct role in the sciences. Science can only deal with phenomena, that is to say, only with what can appear somehow in experience. All scientific concepts must somehow be traceable back to phenomenological roots. Thus, even when Peirce calls himself a realist or is called by others a realist, it must be kept in mind that Peirce was always a realist of the Kantian empirical sort and not a Kantian transcendental realist. His realism is similar to what Hilary Putnam has called internal realism. As was said, Peirce was also a realist in quite another sense of the word. He was a realist or anti-nominalist in the medieval sense. Peirce's Hegelianism, to which he increasingly admitted as he approached his most mature philosophy, is more difficult to understand than his Kantianism, partly because it is everywhere intimately tied to his entire late theory of signs, semiotic, and sign-use semiosis. Thank you for doing your job. I appreciate you calling out the bullshit, semiotics. Aristotle, how many fucking senses of realism are there? Realistically, I don't know. As well as, okay, so, yeah, so his Hegelian as well as is tied to his evolutionism and to his rather puzzling doctrine of mind. There are at least four major components of his Hegelian idealism. First, Peirce in the world of appearances, which he calls the phenomenon, is a world consisting entirely of signs. Signs are qualities, relations, features, items, events, states, regularities, habits, laws, and so on that have meanings, significances, or interpretations. Second, the sign is one term in a threesome of terms that are indissolubly connected with each other by a crucial triadic relation that Peirce calls the sign relation. The sign itself, also called the representamen, is the term in the sign relation that is ordinarily said to represent or mean something. The other two terms in this relation are called the object and the interpretant. The object is what would ordinarily be said of the thing meant or signified or represented by the sign, that the sign is a sign of. The interpretant of a sign is said by Peirce to be to which the sign represents the object. What exactly Peirce meant by the interpretant is difficult to pin down. It is something like a mind, a mental act, a mental state, or a feature or quality of mind. Yeah, I'm getting the sense that whoever wrote this was having a little too much fun, Valpo. Or maybe they weren't having enough fun and this is where their brain was going. Your fucking isn't real, that's why you're a nerd? I mean, if it's real to you, Aristotle, if it's real to you. And yeah, let me just, anyone who hasn't seen or hasn't been around, I know the other people in chat know you, but Aris is a streamer, and everyone out there should go check out Aristotle's stream. Especially if you're on YouTube, you should come over to Twitch and then go hang out in Aristotle's chat and ask him questions. You've had many philosophers tell you that Peirce is incredibly tough to understand. Yeah, I think part of it was what they were saying earlier. I don't know if you were here for that part, but they were saying like the collected papers are just like a mishmash of papers, so they don't really go in order, which of course makes things hard. Yeah, but like yeah, in Peirce himself, I don't think was an easy philosopher. Someone keeps sending me messages. One sec. Yeah, so this is the problem with when Peirce is talking about mind, it's very hard to figure out. So something like when the what is doing the like cognizing for Peirce is hard. It is something like a mind, a mental act, mental state, or a feature quality of mind. I only wish one day. I think that's actually my mom. I'm gonna have to give her a ride in a few weeks. To a doctor's appointment. So yeah, not exactly rich supermodel girlfriends, but hey, maybe one day one can hope. Okay. Yeah, someday we can hope. Alright, so it's something like a mind mental act. All events the interpretant is something ineliminably mental. Yeah, so there's something mental, but it's hard to pin down. I read something about this before. The Peircean mind is somehow actually not ever like in your head. It's somehow, it did work for Zizek, but like he is sort of unique in that the thought is somewhere between what I'm saying and what you're getting on your side. Like, so all the people out there who are listening to me talk, there is the thing I'm trying to express, the thing that you're sort of getting in, and then like the actual thought, something in between. So it's not so easy to yeah. Do I have to start scratching my nose? Is that like what, like, do I like do this the whole time, and is that how like Zizek gets his got like his hot girlfriends and like fame? Do this, like, I don't know, just like start yeah, how do I like channel Zizek? That would be kind of like a good idea. Okay. Third, the interpretant of a sign, yeah, sign by virtue of by the very definition Peirce gives of the sign relation must itself be a sign, and a sign moreover of the very same object that is or was represented by the original sign. Yeah, do I have to start doing Lacanian movie theory? You know, maybe that's the whole point of this stuff. Semiotics is right the whole time. This is how the world is going to change, is movie theory. Movie analysis. Could be. Probably doing better than I am. Well, I know Zizek is doing better than I am. In effect, then, the interpretant is a second signifier of the object, only one that now has an overtly mental status. And say, oh, do you know? The corporation can see from the, yeah. Interrupt yourself and often, yeah. Yeah. One of these days I'll figure out how to make a lot of money out of philosophy. I haven't quite got there yet. But, yeah. The Twitch streaming is super lucrative, though. You should, like, all try streaming. Get lots of followers. It's awesome. Okay. But merely in being a sign of the original object, this second sign must itself have, Peirce uses the word determined and interpretant, which then in its turn is a new third sign of the object, and again is only one with overtly mental status. Yeah, well, I don't want to be creeping on the undergrads either. That's weird. Okay, and so on. Thus, if there is any sign at all of any object, then there is an infinite sequence of signs of that same object. So everything in the phenomenon, because it is a sign, begins an infinite sequence of mental interpretations of an object. Yeah, I mean, you've got this weird, the sign, what is learned in the mental is something in between us, and then you've got like a third thing on top of that, and thing on top of that, because like the sign can be like, it is like self-reinterpreted. Like whatever you're just is there, then that sort of thing is also causes a regress of analysis. Be Amaranth, but philosophy, or Hassan maybe. I mean, I can wear a bikini, I guess, and get a kiddie pool. I mean, how many like subs to write someone's name on my forehead? I don't know. I mean, there's nothing like inherently like, that's fine. I was trying to think how many like subs would it actually take. I don't know. And the funny thing is, I just realized someone was mentioning Amaranth recently. I don't watch her streams. Like, it's not proud. I was just thinking I've seen her streams before, but it's been like at least 6 months since I caught one of her streams, or even like more than like 10 seconds of one of her streams. And so maybe I should go see if like she's doing something new. She's an innovator. Okay. But now there's a fourth component of Peirce's idealism. Peirce makes everything in the phenomenon evolutionary. The whole system evolves. 3 figures from the history of culture loomed exceedingly large in the intellectual development of Peirce and in the cultural atmosphere of the period in which Peirce was most active. Hegel in philosophy, Lyell in geology, and Darwin along with Alfred Russel Wallace in biology. These thinkers, of course, all had a single theme in common: evolution. Hegel described an evolution of ideas, Lyell an evolution of geological structures, and Darwin an evolution of biological species and varieties. Peirce absorbed it all. Peirce's entire thinking, early on and later, is permeated with evolutionary idea, which he extended generally, that is to say, beyond the confines of any particular subject matter. For Peirce, the entire universe and everything in it is an evolutionary product. Indeed, he conceived that even the most firmly entrenched of nature's habits, for example, even those habits that are typically called natural laws, have themselves evolved and accordingly can and should be subjects of philosophical and scientific inquiry. One can sensibly seek, in Peirce's view, evolutionary explanations of the existence of particular natural laws. For Peirce, then, the entire phenomenon, the world of appearances, as well as all the ongoing processes of its interpretation through mental significations, has evolved and is evolving. That's interesting. I didn't know he had done that. I did not know about that as part of his philosophy. What's interesting about the evolution of like natural law, that's entirely possible. It's theoretically not even that hard to pull off, because you can think of like our natural laws as like, a stable like state in the universe. Like our part of the universe has like stabilized into these laws, but it could get shaken up, and then like other laws would more fundamental laws would actually happen, but it would break apart our kind of like the stability of our area in the universe, which is entirely a reasonable thing because we only know our little bit of the universe. So the thing about whatever's maintaining the laws that we think they're laws does not have to continue. Now, no one familiar with Hegel can escape the obvious comparison. We have Peirce, and we have in Peirce an essential idealist theory that is similar to the idealism that Hegel puts forward in the Phenomenologie des Geistes. Furthermore, both Hegel and Peirce make the whole evolutionary interpretation of the evolving phenomenon to be a process that is said to be logical, the action of logic itself. Of course, there are differences between the two philosophers. For example, what exactly Hegel's logic is has been shrouded in mystery for every Hegelian after Hegel himself, and some philosophers, for example, Popper, would say for every Hegelian, including Hegel. By contrast, Peirce's logic is reasonably clear, and he takes great pains to work it out in intricate detail. Basically, Peirce's logic is the whole logic apparatus of the physical and social sciences. I think I've told this on stream before, but I took a Hegel class when I was an undergrad, and someone once, Hegel said something, and asked a teacher who was like a Hegel scholar, like that was his business, he was a Hegelian. And so he stops, he sort of like wanders around the room, he takes like time to think, and he says, look, the day before Hegel died, two men understood Hegel and God. Then Hegel died. And that was his answer to, can you make Hegel clearer than this? Yeah. One implication of the unending nature of the interpretation of appearances through infinite sequences of signs is that Peirce cannot be any type of epistemological foundationalist or believer in absolute or apodeictic knowledge. He must be and is an anti-foundationalist and a fallibilist. From his earliest to his latest writings, Peirce opposed and attacked all forms of epistemological foundationalism, and in particular all forms of Cartesianism and a priorism. And what's up? How you doing? We're okay. We had a request to read about. This is the SEP article of Charles Sanders Peirce, who is an American pragmatist, the founder of American pragmatism. So, and did a lot of different things. So we're just going through the article. So it's kind of descriptive. May not be as exciting philosophically, but we get to talk about a lot of stuff. I hope you're doing okay, or doing well. So that's just kind of where we're at. And yeah, again, everyone who is here probably knows already, but let's give Anne a shout out. Because, yeah, Anne's a fantastic streamer, knows, recently left, a research position, and trying to, for good reason, and is, trying to, stream and do other cool things. So, check out Anne, she's good people. Alright, yeah, so he did not like Cartesianism and a priorism. Philosophy must begin wherever it happens to be at the moment, he thought, and not at some supposed ideal foundation. Thank you, Anne. Appreciate that. Especially not in some world of private references. The only important thing in thinking scientifically the only important thing in scientifically is to apply the scientific method itself. This method he held to be essentially public and reproducible in its activities, as well as self-correcting in the following sense. No matter where different researchers may begin, as long as they follow the scientific method, their results will eventually converge to the same outcome. See, this is, yeah, they're going to comment on this. The pragmatic or pragmaticist conception of meaning implies that two theories with the exact same empirical content must have, despite superficial appearances, the same meaning. Now, the idea that like there's any convergence here at all, why should anything converge to any outcome? I don't know, but for Peirce, I've heard this claim get said before. For a person, if you're a pragmatist and basically you think you're being able to accomplish stuff, you have to assume that we are actually getting things right a significant percentage of the time. Because otherwise there would be no convergence. You have to think that we get something right about the world, maybe not all the time, but with a statistical probability that is well above zero. Because if it's close to zero, there is no way that no matter how much scientific method you do, you're never going to converge if it's just not above a certain threshold. So it's just gonna, keep going off into like doing whatever. So you have to. So this is a one of these idealistic things that our methodology is getting at the truth in the world. So this ideal point of convergence is what Peirce means by the truth, and reality is simply what is meant by the truth. That these Peircean notions of reality and truth are inherently idealist rather than naively realist in character should require no special pleading. Yeah. Like I said, you have to understand this. Like this is like it sort of permeates the whole philosophy. That in pragmatism, you have to think you're getting stuff right. Okay, connected with Peirce's anti-foundationalism is his insistence on the fallibility of particular achievements in science. Yeah, it's still fallible, but you can't get everything wrong all the time. Although the scientific method will eventually converge to something as a limit, nevertheless, at any temporal point in the process of scientific inquiry, we are only at a provisional stage of it and cannot ascertain how far off we may be from the limit to which we are somehow converging. This insistence on the fallibilism of human inquiry is connected with several other important themes of Peirce's philosophy. His evolutionism has already been discussed. Fallibilism is obviously connected with the fact that science is not shooting at a fixed target, but rather one that is always moving, what Peirce calls his Tychism, which is his anti-deterministic insistence that there is objective chance in the world, is also intimately connected to his fallibilism. Tychism will be discussed below. Despite Peirce's insistence on fallibilism, he is far from being an epistemological pessimist or skeptic. Indeed, he is quite the opposite. He tends to hold that every genuine question, that is, every question whose possible answers have empirical content, can be answered in principle, or at least should not be assumed to be unanswerable. For this reason, one of his most important dicta, which he calls his first principle of reason, is, "Do not block the way of inquiry." For Peirce, as we saw, the scientific method involves three phases or stages: abduction, making conjectures or creating hypotheses; deduction, inferring what should be the case if the hypotheses are the case; and induction, the testing of hypotheses. The process of going through the stages should also be carried out with concern for the economy of research. Peirce's understanding of scientific method, then, is not very different from today's idea of scientific method, which seems to have been derived historically both from William Whewell and Peirce. Today's understanding sees the scientific method as the method of constructing hypotheses, deriving consequences from these hypotheses, and then experimentally testing these hypotheses, guided always by the economics of research. Also, as said above, Peirce increasingly came to understand his three types of logical inferences as being phases or stages of the scientific method. For example, as Peirce came to extend and generalize his notion of abduction, abduction became defined as inference to and provisional acceptance of an explanatory hypothesis for the purpose of testing it. Abduction is not always inference to the best explanation, but it is always inference to some explanation, or at least something that clarifies or makes routine some information that has previously been surprising, in the sense that we would not have routinely expected it given our then current state of knowledge. Deduction came to mean for Peirce the drawing of conclusions as to what observable phenomena should be expected if the hypothesis is correct. Induction came for him to mean the entire process of experimentation and interpretation performed in the service of hypothesis testing. Okay, any questions on this stuff? It's a lot of stuff on this understanding of what's going on in science. Okay, let's see how much longer. Yeah, let's finish this up, then we can go check on the because I'm at an hour and 10 minutes or 20 minutes, so this article is going to go on forever. A few further comments are perhaps in connection with Peirce's idea of the economy or economics of research. Concern for the economy of research is a crucial and ineliminable part of Peirce's idea of the scientific method. He understood that science is essentially a human and social enterprise, and that it always operates in some given historical, social, and economic context. In such a context, some problems are crucial and paramount and must be attended to immediately, while other problems are trivial or frivolous, or at least can be put off until later. He understood that in the real context of science, some experiments may be vitally important, while others may be insignificant. Peirce also understood that the economic resources of the scientist, time, money, ability to exert effort, are always scarce, even though all the while the great ocean of truth which lies undiscovered before us is infinite. All resources for carrying out research, such as personnel, person-hours, and apparatus, are quite costly. Accordingly, it is wasteful, indeed irrational, to squander them. Peirce proposed, therefore, that careful consideration be paid to the problem of how to obtain the biggest epistemological bang for the buck. I'm sorry, Semiotics, this is America. Bang for the buck. In effect, the economics of research is a cost-benefit analysis in connection with the state of knowledge. Although this idea has been insufficiently explored by Peirce scholars, Peirce himself regarded it as central to the scientific method and to the idea of rational behavior. It is connected with what he called speculative rhetoric or methododeutic, which will be discussed below. Okay, so we are now up to section 5 of 16. Again, if anyone has any preferences on sections, because we're only so far I've been requested to do section 10. Everything else, we did the first we were up to 5 and they're out of 16, so there'd be another 2 hours if I kept going. And I don't think I want to do another 2 hours of this. So I'm going to go to Mind and Semiotic now. And if anyone has any requests for any of the other sections, please let me know, and then we can look at those. Okay, so Section 10, Mind and Semiotic. Connected with Peirce's insistence on the ubiquity of mind in the cosmos is the importance he attached to what he called semiotic, the theory of signs in the most general sense. Although a few points concerning the subject were made earlier in this article, some further discussion is in order. What Peircean meant by semiotic... you're moving out. Oh, you had a bad day. I'm sorry. Alright, well, I hope the packing goes well. I didn't know if you got a place yet, but if you did, that's amazing. And have a good move if possible. I heard once that the 3 most traumatic experiences in a person's life are death, marriage, and moving. Like if someone dies, you get married and then you move. And it's not necessarily in that order. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Rest in peace, Lola. So that's really hard. I'm sorry to hear. I remember seeing the doggy. So okay. Well, we wish you the best. So that's no fun. Anywho. Okay. So although a few points concerning the subject were made earlier in this article, some further discussion is in order. What Peircean meant by semiotic is almost totally different from what has come to be called semiotics, and which hails not so much from Peirce as from Ferdinand de Saussure and Charles W. Morris. Even though Peircean semiotic and semiotics are often confused, it is important not to do so. Peircean semiotic derives ultimately from the theory of signs of Duns Scotus and its later development by John of St. Thomas, John Poinsot. In Peirce, I don't know how to say that. In Peirce's theory of sign relation is a triadic relation that is a special species of the genus, the representing relation. Whenever the representing relation has an instance, we find one thing, the object, being represented by or in another thing, the representamen, and being represented to or in a third thing, the interpretant. Moreover, the object is represented by the representamen in such a way that the interpretant is thereby determined to be also a representamen of the object to yet another interpretant. That is to say, the interpretant stands in the representing relation to the same object represented by the original representamen, and thus the interpretant represents the object either again or further to yet another interpretant. Obviously, Peirce's complicated definition entails that we have an infinite sequence of representaments of an object whenever we have any one representamen of it. Yeah, so I'm representing whatever the stuff is on the page that I'm reading in front of you, but then I also, the idea of me representing it also has a representation of that. So all these things sort of you have the theory that sort of loops back on itself because the sign is again represented. The sign relation is the special species of the representing relation that obtains whenever the first interpretant, and consequently each member of the whole infinite sequence of interpretants, has a status that is mental, that is roughly a cognition of a mind. In any instance of the sign relation, an object is signified by a sign to a mind. One of Peirce's central tasks was that of analyzing all possible kinds of signs. For this purpose, he introduced various distinctions among signs and discussed various ways of classifying them. One set of distinctions among signs was introduced by Peirce in the early stages of his analysis. The distinction in this set turn on whether the particular instance of the sign relation is degenerate or non-degenerate. The notion of degeneracy here is the standard mathematical notion as applies to sign theory. Non-degeneracy means simply that the triadic relation cannot be analyzed as a logical conjunction of any combination of dyadic relations and monadic relations. Okay, so this is basically saying, is it a dyad or a triad, basically. And if it's a dyad, you can break it up, but if it's a triad, then it's not so clear what you're breaking up. More exactly, a particular instance of the obtaining of a sign of the sign relation is degenerate if and only if the fact that a sign S means an object O to an interpretant I can be analyzed into a conjunction of facts of the form PS and QO and RI and TSO and UOI and WIS. Okay, I have no idea what that whole thing means, where not all the conjuncts have to be present. Either an obtaining of the sign relation is non-degenerate, in which case it falls into one class, or it is degenerate in various possible ways depending on which of the conjuncts are omitted and which retained, in which case it falls into various other classes. Other distinctions regarding signs were introduced later by Peirce. Some of them will be discussed very briefly in the following section of this article. Okay, so let's do semiotic and logic then. Peirce's settled opinion was that logic in the broadest sense is to be equated with the semiotic, the general theory of signs, and that logic in a much narrower sense, which he typically called logic critic, is one of the three major divisions or part of semiotic. Thus, in his later writings, he divided semiotic into speculative grammar, logical critic, and speculative rhetoric, also called methodeutic. Peirce's word speculative is his Latinate version of the Greek-derived word theoretical, and should be understood to mean exactly what the word theoretical means. Peirce's tripartite division of semiotic is not to be confused with Charles W. Morris's version, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, although there may be some commonalities in the two trichotomies. Okay, so we've got... Yeah, because the one we normally see around is syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. How does the symbols and the meanings relate pragmatically, and how do we use these things? Versus the Peircean one, which is grammar, logic, and speculative rhetoric. So, I mean, the grammar would seem like it would line up with the syntax. The critic, I guess, might be something else. I don't know. The speculative rhetoric might somewhere align with the semantics or the pragmatics. I don't know. Okay. By speculative grammar, Peirce understood the analysis of the kinds of signs that there are and the ways that they can be combined significantly. So it does seem like a syntaxy sort of thing. For example, under this heading, he introduced three trichotomies of signs and argued for the real possibility of only certain kinds of signs. Signs are quali-signs, sin signs, or legi signs, accordingly as they are mere qualities, individual events or states, or habits or laws, respectively. Okay. Signs are icons, indices, also called semes, don't know, or symbols, sometimes called tokens, accordingly as they derive their significance from resemblances to their objects, a real relation, for example, of causation with their objects, or are connected only by a convention to their objects, respectively. Signs are rhematic signs, also called summi signs, and remes, disi signs, also called quasi-propositions or arguments, also called Saudi signs. Accordingly as they are predicational, relational in character, propositional in character, or argumentative in character. Because the three trichotomies are independent of each other, together they yield the abstract possibility that there are 27 distinct kinds of signs. Peirce argued, however, that 17 of these signs are logically impossible, so that finally only 10 kinds of signs are genuinely possible. In terms of these 10 kinds of signs, Peirce endeavored to construct a theory of all possible natural and conventional signs, whether simple or complex. You know what would be fun? If, you were a fiction writer, you could, a horror writer, you could be you could, go find Peirce's writings, and then you could say, well, these are the 10 signs that normal people could use, and then, the other 17 are, you could have, wizards or something that use the other 17, or, magical beasts that can use the other kinds of signs. Okay, yeah. What Peirce meant by logical critic is pretty much logic in the ordinary accepted sense of logic, from Aristotle's logic to present-day mathematical logic. As might be expected, a crucial concern of logical critique is to characterize the difference between correct and incorrect reasoning. Peirce achieved extraordinary, extensive, and deep results in this area, and a few of his accomplishments in this area will be discussed below. By speculative rhetoric or methodeutic, Peirce understood all inquiry into the principles of the effective use of science for producing valuable courses of research and giving valuable expositions. So this is sort of like meaning, though. All inquiry into the principles of the effective use. Remember, and the effective use is that it had some sort of meaning in the world. It had a cash value of meaning of the world is what was important. Methodeutic studies the method of that researchers should use in investigating given expositions of and creating applications of the truth. Peirce also understood under the heading of speculative rhetoric the analysis of communicational interactions and strategies and their bearing on the evaluation of inferences. Peirce's important topic on the economy of research is closely affiliated with his idea of speculative rhetoric. The idea of methodeutic may overlap to some small extent with Morris's notion of pragmatics, but the spirit of Peirce's notion is much more extensive than that of Morris's notion. Moreover, Peirce handled the notion of indexical reference under the heading of speculative grammar and not under the heading of speculative rhetoric, whereas the topic certainly belongs to Morris's pragmatics. There clearly exist connections between Peirce's speculative rhetoric and on the one hand, and the attention paid by 20th century philosophers such as Wittgenstein and Austin to matters having to do with language as a set of various social practices. Unfortunately, however, little attention has been paid by Peirce scholars to the relation between Peirce's thinking and familiar 20th century notions such as Wittgenstein's language games and Austin's speech acts. I think people are starting to glom onto this now, but yeah, this is a more recent thing. Like the author said at the beginning of this is a 2014 article, and I think even in the last 5 years I've seen things that are starting to do this. Speculative rhetoric, however, has attracted considerable philosophical attention in recent years, especially among Finnish Peirce scholars centering about the University of Helsinki. These have noted that there are extensive affiliations between Peirce's discussions of the communicational and dialogical aspects of semiotic on the one hand, and the many and varied game theoretical approaches to logic that have been for some time of interest to Finnish philosophers as well as many others. On the other hand, various proposals for the game theoretic semantical approaches to logic have been developed and applied to Peirce's logic, as well as being used to understand Peircean points. All right, and just like to put my cards on the table, my advisor was one of these Finnish, when I was an undergrad, was one of these Finnish philosophers. I do things game theoretic semantically. Like, that's generally how I interpret semantics, is in the game theoretical approach. And so, like, this is like this is where exactly I come out of. This analytic history this is exactly where I hail from. So, in some sense, the way I started thinking about things, when I start thinking like more formally about them, this is exactly where where I come out of. So this is why when I make some comments on this, it's because I have this is like when I was in school, I was doing some of this. So okay, so now we've done the stuff on semiotics. There wasn't a whole lot on it. Is there anybody in chat who is interested in any other of these? Because we've been doing this for well over an hour now, and we could keep going. Let's see. Is there anything I want to know? Let's see real fast. What year is this? Like, they didn't... Oh, so even though this was written originally in 2014, apparently, and it was first published in 2001, they did update some parts of this, at least in 2021. So this isn't all old. Let's see if it says any more about this. So by Robert Burch, 2021. Yeah, you can see that bit on the 2014 stuff earlier, that it didn't all go... Like, it obviously has not all been updated, but, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, let's see. I'm going to read maybe one or two more of these sections, maybe just one more section. Let's see, what do we like? Let's do I'm going to go read about the evolutionism because I didn't know about that. So we're going to read the anti-determinism. Oh, did I do that or no? Freedom isn't free. No, but are you going to pay to make me do something? I mean, do you have any other like sections you want to hear about Peirce? Like I'm always willing to listen to that. But I mean, yeah, what is going on with that? Yeah, I'm gonna read the that'd be what I would do is like the anti-determinism. See what he has to say about this. Okay, anti-determinism, Tychism, and evolution. Did I read this? No. Okay. Against powerful currents of determinism that derive from the Enlightenment philosophy of the 18th century, Peirce urged that there was not the slightest scientific evidence for determinism, and that in fact there was considerable scientific evidence against it. I mean, this is interesting because people don't think that nowadays. I'm an anti-determinist, so. Okay. Always by the words science and scientific, Peirce understood reference to actual practice by scientists in the laboratory in the field, and not reference to entries in scientific textbooks. In attacking determinism, therefore, Peirce appealed to the evidence of the actual phenomena in laboratories and fields. Here, what is obtained is the actual observations, for example, measurements, does not fit neatly into some one point or simple function. If we take, for example, 1,000 measurements of some physical quantity, even a simple one such as length or thickness, no matter how carefully we may do so, we will not obtain the same result 1,000 times. Rather, what we get is a distribution, often but not always, certainly not necessarily, something akin to a normal or Gaussian distribution, or hundreds of different results. Again, if we measure the value of some variable that we assume to depend on some given parameter, and if we let the parameter vary while we take successive measurements, the result in general will not be a smooth function. For example, a straight line or an ellipse. Rather, it will be typically a jagged result to which we can at best fit a smooth function by using some clever method. For example, fitting a regression line by the method of least squares. Naively, we might imagine that the variation and relative inexactness of our measurement will become less pronounced and obtrusive the more refined and microscopic our measurement tools and procedures. Peirce, the practicing scientist, knew better. What actually happens, if anything, is that our variations get relatively greater the finer our instrumentation and the more the delicate the procedures. Obviously, Peirce would not have been the least surprised by the results obtained from measurements at the quantum level. Yeah, so this is the thing. People think like we're like approaching like scientific results, but a lot of times it gets like sort of fractal. Like things, the smaller you get, the more jagged it gets, and so there's no real like the idea that like we're all approaching something. It's not always the case that we're approaching anything. Sometimes we're just making a mess of things. Okay. What the directly measured facts of scientific practice seem to tell us, then, is that although the universe displays varying degrees of habit, that is to say, of partial varying approximate and statistical regularity, the universe does not display deterministic law. It does not directly show anything like a total exact non-statistical regularity. Moreover, the habits that nature does display are always appearing in varying degrees of entrenchment or congealing at one end of the spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, we have the nearly law-like behavior of larger physical objects like boulders and planets, but at the other end of the spectrum, we see in human processes of imagination and thought an almost pure freedom and spontaneity, and in the quantum world of the very small, we see the results of almost pure chance. The immediate raw result, then, of scientific observation through measurement is that not everything is exactly fixed by exact law, even if everything should be constrained to some degree by habit. In his earliest thinking about the significance of this fact, Peirce opined that natural law pervaded the world, but that for certain facets of reality were just outside the reach or grasp of law. In his later thinking, however, Peirce came to understand this fact as meaning that reality in its entirety was lawless and that pure spontaneity had an objective status in the phaneron. Peirce called his doctrine that chance had an objective status in the universe Tychism, a word taken from the Greek word for chance or luck, or what the gods happen to choose to lay on one. Tychism is a fundamental doctrine doctrinal part of Peirce's mature view, and reference to his Tychism provides an added reason for Peirce's insisting that on the irreducible fallibilism of inquiry. For nature is not a static world of unswerving law, but rather a dynamic and dicey world of evolved and continually evolving habits that directly exhibit considerable spontaneity. Peirce would have embraced quantum indeterminacy. I doubt that, actually. I hate when people use quantum indeterminacy. He would have liked it, but I don't know exactly how much. But this is interesting. I didn't realize this was his position on stuff. I did not know this. But it looks like it's like a real, strong sort of realism. Because if you really think what you're looking at is real, then you have to take the world seriously as it is. And the world in itself is not a neat place where there's perfectly mathematical representations in the world. There's no perfect circles that you can run into on a daily basis. It's all messy. And so it's interesting that that you just are going to always build in miracles, basically. What the gods happen to choose to lay on one. There's just going to be miracles, good or bad, all the time. And so yeah. Okay. One possible path along which nature evolves and acquires its habits was explored by Peirce using statistical analysis in situations of experimental trials in which the probabilities of outcomes in later trials are not independent of actual outcomes in earlier trials, situations of so-called non-Bernoullian trials. Peirce showed that if we posit a certain primal habit in nature, specifically the tendency, however slight, to take on habits, however tiny, then the result in the long run is often a high degree of regularity and a great macroscopic exactness. For this reason, Peirce suggested that in the remote past, nature was considerably more spontaneous than it has now become, and that in general and as a whole, all the habits that nature has come to exhibit have evolved. Just as ideas, geological formations, and biological species have evolved, natural habits has evolved. I mean, and I've seen this argued actually not too long ago. Basically, it's saying that, the laws of nature, they were more variable in the past, and then they sort of they became less shaky over time. It's sort of things get reduce into more of a stable state. So you get into a excited state, an electron gets into it, and then it collapses down into a more stable state. It's saying the laws of nature aren't any different from the laws of the other physical processes, and those tend to reduce down into a less excited state, and that's the same thing with the laws of nature, just at a different level. So in this evolutionary notion of nature and natural law, we have an added support of Peirce's insistence on the inherent fallibilism of scientific inquiry. Nature may simply change even in its most entrenched fundamentals. Thus, even if scientists were at one point in time to have conceptions and hypotheses about nature that survived every attempt to falsify them, this fact alone would not ensure that at some later point in time these same conceptions and hypotheses would remain accurate or even pertinent. And you can, this is the new Riddle of Induction. So a few years later, we have riddles of induction that come off this sort of idea. People don't know the riddles of induction, that's saying, look, do I have anything? Yeah, this is orange here. This is an orange. I don't know how great the color is going to come out. Oh, my shirt's red. You can just use that. So, grue is a color that is green. Do I have anything green? This is green. So green is a color. This is not green. This is grue. This color grue is that it's green up until the year 2054, and then after that it's gonna be blue. So that's what this color is right here. It's grue. It's not green. And how do you know that colors won't shift in time at some later point? We don't know, because 2054 hasn't come around yet. So how do we know that that is green and not grue? But see, this is the sort of thing. And how do you argue against that when everything in nature is possibly changeable? Very hard. And so people talk about this sometimes. It's called Nelson Goodman. I think it's Nelson Goodman. New Riddle of Induction. Anywho, an especially intriguing and curious twist in Peirce's evolutionism is that in Peirce's view, evolution involves what he calls agapism. I don't know how to say that. Agapism? Agapeism? Peirce speaks of evolutionary love. According to Peirce, agapeism. According to Peirce, the most fundamental engine of the evolutionary process is not struggle, strife, greed, or competition. Rather, it is nurturing love, in which an entity is prepared to sacrifice its own perfection for the sake of the well-being of its neighbor. This doctrine had a social significance for Peirce, who apparently had the intention of arguing against the morally repugnant but extremely popular socioeconomic Darwinism of the late 19th century. The doctrine also had for Peirce a cosmic significance, which Peirce associated with the doctrine of the Gospel of John and with the mystical ideas of Swedenborg and Henry James. In part 4 of the third, I had no idea about this either. This is a little wild. In part 4 of the third of Peirce's 6 papers in Popular Science Monthly, entitled The Doctrine of Chances, Peirce even argued that simply being logical presupposes the ethics of self-sacrifice. He who would not sacrifice his own soul to save the whole world is, as it seems to me, illogical in all his inferences collectively. To social Darwinism and to the related sort of thinking that constituted for Herbert Spencer and others a supposed justification for the more rapacious practices of unbridled capitalism, Peirce referred in disgust as the gospel of greed. And there we go, Semiotics. We finally got someone who hated capitalism in this podcast. And oh man, and am I busted again? Okay, there we go. This Twitch stream finally got, he was woke. The rapacious practices of unbridled capitalism, Peirce referred in disgust as the gospel of greed. Okay. I think, now we're at an hour 48 of this stream, so I've been reading this for, over an hour and a half. I think I want to cut it here because we could just keep going for another 3 hours, and I'll read something else, but I want to take a short break to get some more water and beer or something, so I want to call it BRB, but
You're winning, sir. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Semiotics.
Side Semiotics gifted 2 bits. Side Semiotics says, party party.
The only problem with this new text-to-speech, it's all local, is that I had to, I was futzing with it. I couldn't get to work fast. So I had to, put a pause on it. So it takes a full 4 seconds before it plays. I have to see if I can cut that down. But let me know if you have any comments right now. I wonder if, I had no idea he had this sort of, you just have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good theory in, his logic or anything. But other than that, I'll take a BRB after this so I can get another drink and cool off. I don't know where all of you guys are, but it is hot here in New York.